Here we are, 1987. This particular year in the 80s, we would see things take a dark turn. Corruption would be a theme in 87 with a slew of scandals, from political to business to religious.
The flesh is weak, Johnny. Only the soul is immortal.
But who or what could be behind this?
Could it be Satan?
It's possible because in 1987, the Satanic Panic was also sweeping the nation. Hang on tight, because this year is going to be a bumpy ride. We're going to talk about the news, culture, sports, and entertainment, and all that was weird in the 80s. This is Timeline. Today, we're reviving the year 1987. January of 1987 started off with the Rolling Stones' Keith Richards inducting Aretha Franklin to the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, the first woman to make it into the hall. The induction ceremony was only in its second year and didn't have the clout it has now, so Franklin didn't even bother showing up for the ceremony. But that didn't hold Richards back, who in 1987 was still indulging like he was on the 81 Tattoo You World Tour.
Hey, what can I say about Aretha? I mean, you're in, baby!
3 days later, on January 6th, after the U.S. Senate voted 88-4 to establish an 11-member panel, Congress announced it was opening an investigation into the Iran-Contra affair, starring Lieutenant Colonel Oliver North. We'll hear more about the Iran-Contra affair later in the year. The Bangles' Walk Like an Egyptian was already 2 weeks into a 4-week stay at number 1 on Billboard's Hot 100. The Los Angeles-based band's biggest hit reached number 1 on December 19, 1986, getting bumped on January 16th. Late in January, Pennsylvania State Treasurer R. Bud Dwyer shocked everyone when he took his own life in front of a room full of journalists and government staffers. The 47-year-old Dwyer called a press conference at his suburban Pennsylvania home the day before his sentencing, where he was planning on addressing the 11 counts of conspiracy, mail fraud, perjury, and racketeering that were brought against him. After reading from a 21-page letter he had prepared, Dwyer pulled a handgun out of a manila envelope. He backed up against a nearby wall and said, "Please, please, leave the room if this will affect you." As some ran out of the room to find help, others approached Dwyer to stop him. The news cameras caught everything and the aftermath. Many stations, both in Pennsylvania and nationally, aired segments of the incident. The final week of January, America would see its first condom television campaign, when Trojans and Lifestyles condoms each aired commercials in San Francisco, Detroit, and Indianapolis. Both brands would expand their campaigns, pun intended, to 6 more markets, including Los Angeles. While it might seem odd that the first condom television commercial is noteworthy, consider that the word condom had never been said on primetime television until a month earlier on an episode of Cagney and Lacey. Tyne Daly didn't even get to say the word condom either. She said contraceptive.
Your father is right. Contraception is very important. If you care enough about a girl to make love with her, you should also care enough to keep safe.
10 years without freedom in a land called America.
They say I gotta live with you, eat with you.
On the same day, Ben & Jerry's introduced Cherry Garcia to their stable of ice cream flavors. Ranked as one of their longest-serving and best-selling items, Cherry Garcia was actually thought up by a Grateful Dead fan. Go figure. When Jane Williamson, a sworn Deadhead and ice cream fan, contacted the company and suggested they make a cherry-flavored ice cream and call it Cherry Garcia because, as she said, Dead paraphernalia always sells. And it would be a real hoot for the fans. 2 days later, the late Yul Brynner appeared from the grave in an anti-smoking commercial when he was interviewed on ABC's Good Morning America.
Don't smoke. Whatever you do, just don't smoke.
The somber interview was edited into a simple PSA, per his wishes. Brynner, who started smoking at the age of 12, worked his way up to a 5-pack-a-day habit. He was diagnosed with inoperable lung cancer brought on by heavy smoking in June of 1983, despite quitting in 1971. On February 22nd at 6:32 a.m., Andy Warhol died in his sleep at New York Hospital in Manhattan at the age of 58 while he was recovering from gallbladder surgery. Warhol's career spanned every facet of the arts: commercial illustration, photography, music, movies, commercials, and television. But the artist will always be remembered for his silkscreens, specifically his Campbell's Soup Can series, which ultimately revolutionized the art world, and which were good. Hopping from the east to the west coast, Grimes Posnikov, also known as the Human Jukebox, was ticketed in early March on the San Francisco Wharf for breaking the local noise ordinance. For 15 years, tourists and locals would walk up to the painted refrigerator box Posnikov was hiding in, slip him some loose change, request a song, and the Human Jukebox came to life. It's fair to say that the Human Jukebox was a beloved San Francisco attraction. But the good times ended when Posnikov was cited for playing I Left My Heart in San Francisco, 13 decibels over the legal limit. After being ticketed, Posnikov quit his street performance gig, sold his apartment, and began living on the streets. On March 19th, Jim Baker called it quits, resigning as the chair of the Praise the Lord Ministry, or PTL if you want to get fancy about it, after admitting to a sexual encounter with church secretary Jessica Hahn. Years before, Hahn had been paid the odd sum of $279,000 by the PTL to keep quiet. In late March, the Mobro 4000 barge, filled with 3,168 tons of garbage, set sail on a 6-month voyage along the east coast of North America from Islip, New York to Belize and back, desperately in search of a port to unload its filthy cargo. But because no one wanted any of the New York garbage, the barge was turned away from every dock it tried to stop at. It finally found a home in October, when the barge's trash was dumped and incinerated in Brooklyn. The ash was then hauled to a landfill in Islip, the city where the garbage came from in the first place. After 67 years in show business, Buddy Rich died on April 2nd at the age of 69. Yep, your math is right. Rich was behind a drum kit at the age of 2 in his parents' vaudeville act. He was a child prodigy. By the time he was 4, he was starring on Broadway, and by 15, he was Hollywood's second highest paid child entertainer behind Jackie Coogan. Rich was renowned for his regular appearance on The Tonight Show and The Steve Allen Show, but his greatest appearance was when he went head-to-head with Animal on The Muppet Show. Staying on television, the Fox Broadcasting Company made its primetime debut on April 5th, airing Married with Children, followed by The Tracy Ullman Show, 3 times each. This was the first time since 1955 that there were 4 U.S. television networks with national primetime programming. And speaking of The Tracy Ullman Show, this would be the first time we would see a crude version of The Simpsons on April 19th. When James L. Brooks was working on The Tracy Ullman Show, he asked Matt Groening, a Los Angeles-based cartoonist, if he'd animate his Life in Hell cartoon as short clips between commercials and Ullman's comedy skits. While he was in the lobby waiting to pitch his series to Fox Network execs, Groening realized if he gave the Ullman Show his Life in Hell characters, he'd lose the rights to his life's work. So instead, he created new characters with new storylines right on the spot.
Dad?
Yeah?
What is the mind?
Relax. What is mind? No matter. What is matter? Never mind.
On the same day, California's last free-flying condor was captured by biologists and put into a breeding program after its species was reduced to just 27 remaining birds, all of which were in captivity. It took 6 months of stalking the male condor, officially named AC-9, who was finally caught in Kern County and then driven down to the San Diego Wild Animal Park, where he helped rebuild the condor population. At the time of AC-9's death in 2017, he had played a major role in bringing his species population back up to 270 condors in the wild and close to 450 worldwide. Rebuilding the population, not bad work if you can get it. Joe Hunt founded the Billionaire Boys Club as a Ponzi scheme masquerading as a social and investment club in Los Angeles. But the good times ended when a jury convicted him of murder on April 22nd. Hunt represented himself and was eventually given life without the possibility of parole for the death of Ron Levin, a con artist who had conned the con and stole $4 million. Since Levin's body was never found, Hunt maintains that Levin faked his own death and is still out there somewhere. After being labeled a womanizer by the press, Gary Hart invited journalists to follow him, claiming they'd be bored by what they saw. What they actually found was a relationship between Hart and his campaign aide, Donna Rice. Amid the scandal, Hart pulled out from his second run for president on May 8th.
Have you ever committed adultery?
I do not have to answer that question.
In 1987, riding high off their success from a cherry version of their drink, 7-Up released 7-Up Gold, a new cola that looked and tasted nothing like the regular 7-Up. Roger Easley, president of 7-Up at the time, said 7-Up Gold was misunderstood by the consumer, and it was pulled from the shelves by 1989. Of course, the failure of 7-Up Gold had everything to do with poor marketing. People who loved the crisp, clear taste of regular 7-Up were not into a brown, spicy, cinnamon ginger taste of Gold. Some say it actually was and is better than regular 7-Up. I disagree. The best thing to come from the 7-Up Gold disaster was that it gave us this commercial. The pizza delivery guy? It's Kyle Gass of Tenacious D. Mistaken for an Iranian oil tanker, the USS Stark was attacked on May 17th by an Iraqi Mirage fighter in the Persian Gulf. 37 Americans were killed and 21 injured. While President Reagan initially blamed Iran, Iraq apologized and made restitution. A ceremony is now held each year in Florida in honor of the men who perished in the attack. With about 50 hours of flying experience under his belt, 18-year-old Matthias Rust flew his rented Riem Cessna from Utessen, Germany, across northern Europe and landed on the Bolshoi-Moskvaretsky Bridge, right next to Red Square near the Kremlin. The stunt, which Rust said was to reduce Cold War tension, cost him 4 years in a Soviet labor camp. He was charged with general hooliganism, breaking aviation law, and illegally crossing the USSR's borders. Lucky for Rust, President Reagan and Gorbachev agreed to sign a treaty to put an end to intermediate-range nuclear weapons in Europe. We'll hear more about this IMF treaty later in the year. But one relevant note, Rust's release was baked into the IMF treaty, and the German teenager was released to the West in August of 1988. From Russia to Liverpool, where Adam Horowitz was arrested after the Beastie Boys' final concert of their British tour at the Royal Court Theatre on May 30th. It only took 10 minutes for the concert to devolve into a full-blown melee. The audience and the Beasties eventually started throwing trash at each other, which is when a woman claims Horowitz threw a beer can at her face. Horowitz was hauled off by the Bobbies and was booked and charged with assault causing grievous bodily harm. He was released the following day on a $16,000 bail, but it turns out the po-po got the wrong Beastie. Decades later, Horowitz admitted that Adam Yauch actually threw the beer can, but he took the charge for his buddy, a charge which he was later found innocent. That's a nice Beastie. The same day, the CD video was introduced into the world. CD-ROMs had been around since 1984, so putting information on a small silver disc wasn't completely a new concept. But while CD-ROMs were used for basic computing tasks, the CD video allowed for laserdisc quality video on a compact disc. Unfortunately, because they were recorded in analog, you were only able to get 5 minutes worth of video on a disc. But this technology set the stage for DVDs, which would make their debut 9 years later in Japan on November 1st, 1996.
Want to get Capone? Here's how you get him. He pulls a knife, you pull a gun. He sends one of yours to the hospital, you send one of his to the morgue. That's the Chicago way. And that's how you get Capone.
Moving on to Colorado, 30 acres of tires were set ablaze on June 9th after they were struck by a bolt of lightning. The fire burned for over a week, producing toxic smoke plumes that could be seen 150 miles away. The 80s would see 3 more tire fires that burned a combined 21 million tires. One of those tire fires started in 1989 in Wales, where 10 million tires burned for 13 years, from 1989 to 2001. 13 years. That's a long time. It's a lot of tires. That's a stubborn fire. 3 days later, on June 12th, President Reagan gave his mic-dropping Berlin Wall speech at the Brandenburg Gate in West Berlin. In front of 2 plates of bulletproof glass, Reagan addressed a crowd, and midway into his speech, he called out Mikhail Gorbachev, saying,
"Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall."
When it was all said and done, Gorbachev never did tear down the Berlin Wall. Berliners did it themselves.
Is that? What the is that? What is that, Private Pyle?
Sir, jelly donuts, sir!
A jelly donut?
Sir, yes, sir!
Moving into July, the world got its first taste of Richard Branson when he and Per Lindstrand, a Swedish balloonist, broke the hot air balloon record for crossing the Atlantic Ocean when they took off from Maine for Great Britain. Branson and Lindstrom flew the 21-story tall Virgin Atlantic Flyer and made it across the pond, but landed in Northern Ireland due to foggy weather. After taking off again, Lindstrom lost control of the balloon and crash-landed into the Irish Sea. The Royal Navy had to fish them out, but hey, now they're in the Guinness Book of World Records. 4 days later, on July 7th, Oliver North began his televised testimonial in front of a joint congressional committee that was put together to investigate the Iran-Contra scandal. During the July hearings, North admitted that he had lied to Congress, which earned him 16 felony counts. But he went down arguing that he believed that helping the Contras was a good thing. North also admitted that he had misled Congress, for which, along with other actions, he was later charged.
I'm talking to you!
Drop it! Dead or alive, you are coming with me.
In late July, Mary Hart, host of Entertainment Tonight, had her legs insured with Lloyd's of London for $2 million. $1 million per leg. That's right. Mary Hart's legs were a hot commodity in the 80s. Thanks to Entertainment Tonight's camera angles, Hart's legs were always front and center. Months later, Entertainment Tonight changed their set. Behind her new desk, no one could see Hart's legs. This caused a minor outcry from one concerned and possibly creepy fan named Tom from Lake Placid, Florida, who wrote to NBC claiming, "I think I speak for every man who watches your show. The table has to go." On July 30th, Microsoft bought a small software company called Forethought for a cool $14 million. Forethought was only known for developing PowerPoint 3 months earlier, but it was designed for Macintosh computers only. By 1989, PowerPoint became part of the Microsoft Office suite, although Windows users wouldn't get their hands on a PC version until 1990. In the month of August, we go to the ballpark in a game between the Minnesota Twins and the California Angels, where pitcher Joe Niekro got caught doctoring the ball. Home plate umpire Tim Cheetah thought that the pitch to Brian Downing had a bit too much movement on it and told Niekro to show him the ball. After inspecting the ball, Cheetah asked Niekro to empty his pockets. The 43-year-old pitcher was handed a 10-game suspension for cheating. But maybe he should have gotten time served for his brilliant acting on the mound.
He's out of there. He's been kicked out of the game.
We go again to the USSR, where on August 7th, Lynn Cox became the first person to ever brave the ice-cold waters of the Bering Strait to swim from the United States to Russia. It took 2 hours and 16 minutes to swim from the island of Little Diomede in U.S. waters, across the international dateline, and arrive at the island of Big Diomede in the Soviet Union. Cox's historic swim helped ease Cold War tensions. Later, when the INF Treaty was signed by the two nations on December 9th, Gorbachev gave her props for her bravery. We'll talk more about this treaty later in the year. Let's stop for a drink in August, where Howard Schultz and a group of investors bought the Starbucks coffee chain from its founder, Jerry Baldwin. At the time, it only consisted of 6 locations. Schultz was inspired by a recent trip to Italy, where small coffee shops were a burgeoning culture all to themselves. Fast forward to June 1992, when Starbucks went public on the stock market with 140 coffee shops. Today, there are over 28,000 Starbucks stores. They must be stopped. Heading into October, the AIDS quilt made its inaugural presentation in Washington, D.C. on the 11th, during the National March on Washington for Lesbian and Gay Rights. The idea of a quilt came from activist Cleve Jones, who wanted the patched blanket to represent people who died of AIDS-related causes but didn't receive funerals due to the social stigma of the disease. Today, the quilt weighs an estimated 54 tons and is considered the largest piece of community folk art in the world. When baby Jessica McClure fell into a well on October 14th, Americans glued themselves to their TVs. CNN reported rescue footage around the clock and even prompted President Reagan to address the ordeal on national television. Jessica was finally pulled out of the well 2 days later.
There she is.
Late in October, the U.S. Navy confirmed that it had trained and deployed dolphins to the Persian Gulf to locate the deadly spiked mines that Iran planted to threaten Gulf shipping. This wasn't the first time Americans acted like Aquaman and used underwater friends for intel. U.S. government officials acknowledged the Navy Marine Mammal Program at the Space and Naval Warfare Systems Command, where they had been training dolphins, seals, and whales, for wartime efforts since 1962. Whitesnake's Is This Love was released October 27th, making it to number 9 on the British UK charts and number 2 in the US, blocked from the number 1 spot by the impossible-to-topple Faith by George Michael. The power ballad was a little sappy, but the video introduced the world to lead singer David Coverdale's model girlfriend, Tawny Katane. Teenage boys around the world rejoiced.
I'm to drive you to Wichita to catch a train?
In late November, Korea Air's Flight 858 vanished off Burma over the Indian Ocean, along with all 115 people on board. It was soon discovered that North Korean agent Kim Hyun-hui and her accomplice planted a time bomb on the South Korean airjet a day earlier, detonating it over the Andaman Sea as it was making its way to Thailand. When the conspirators were caught, they took cyanide. Her male accomplice successfully committed suicide, leaving Hyung-hui on her own during her trial. Eventually, she was sentenced to death, but was later pardoned by the president of South Korea because it was judged that she had been brainwashed by Kim Jong-il and North Korean operatives. We might understand what may have inspired Kim Jong-il in a few minutes. The following day, on November 30th, during a Monday night football game, Bo Jackson barreled over Brian Bosworth, essentially ending the linebacker's career. Bo versus Boz had been hyped for weeks, but it wasn't really a contest. Jackson racked up 3 touchdowns and 221 rushing yards. The Boz's time in the NFL lasted just 17 more games, but his retirement gave him lots of time to audition for movies. In 1991, the Boz starred in Stone Cold, which in our opinion is the best movie ever. Well, that and maybe Lawrence of Arabia. It's really close between the two. There's so many similarities, but also some differences. We should meet and talk about it sometime. When KFC opened in Tiananmen Square, Western-style fast food chains were a new thing in China. The success was due more to the novelty than the locals actually loving the food. Staying in Asia, North Korea's Kim Jong-il published an 83-page essay on filmmaking titled The Cinema and Directing. Yes, Kim Jong-il was a serious cinephile. He curated a private collection of approximately 30,000 films that he kept in a climate-controlled vault. He wrote several other academic essays on cinema, and he published On the Art of the Cinema, his opus on North Korean filmmaking. The Supreme Leader's favorite movie? James Bond films, with Sean Connery being his favorite of all the 007s. It was reported that he was heartbroken and deeply insulted when the bad guys in 1991's Die Another Day were the North Koreans. Moving into December, Ronald Clements, James Hardy, and Theron Rowland attacked and killed Stephen Newberry, a Carl Junction High School classmate of theirs, during a time when America was dealing with the early stages of satanic panic. Near the Ozark Mountains, the 3 boys turned on Newberry. They beat him with baseball bats, then tied a boulder to his body and threw him down a well. When caught one day later, the 3 boys admitted they did it for 2 reasons. The first reason was curiosity. They just wondered what it would feel like. The second reason was Satan. Newberry was their human sacrifice. Coming back to the INF Treaty, President Reagan and Mikhail Gorbachev signed the Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces Treaty in Washington, D.C. The treaty stated that America and the Soviet Union agreed to get rid of their reserves of intermediate-range and shorter-range land-based missiles, which had the capacity to carry nuclear warheads. And while there is no data to prove it, we're going to go on record and say Sting's song Russians had something to do with dismantling the Cold War. 10 days later, on December 18th, Final Fantasy made its debut, and the role-playing video game quickly became one of the most influential and successful games for Nintendo. Why was the game called Final Fantasy? The game's creator, Hironobu Sakaguchi, admitted in a 2015 interview that he was prepared to quit the gaming industry and go back to college if the title failed.
The point is, ladies and gentlemen, that greed, for lack of a better word, is good.
Keeping to the theme of greed, Ivan Boesky, who was once considered the financial world's most powerful speculator and the personification of Wall Street excesses, was sentenced to 3 years in prison on December 18th. Boesky also had to pay back $100 million in penalties for conspiring to file false stock trading records. Staying in jail, Lynette Squeaky Fromm escaped from the Alderson Federal Prison for Women in California on December 23rd. Squeaky was serving a life sentence for the attempted assassination of President Gerald Ford. She was captured 2 days later and taken to another women's prison in Texas. What compelled Squeaky to escape? Well, she wanted to visit Charles Manson. And who could blame her? He was so culty cuddly.
We're really hip.
Just in time for the new year, fluoxetine, also known as Prozac, was approved by the FDA on December 29th. Widely used for depression, it's also shown to be effective in other disorders, including OCD, alcohol dependence, and binge eating. And to close out the year, 1 second was added to the global clock on December 31st to accommodate the slight difference between precise time as measured by atomic clocks and the less than precise observed solar time. And that extra second is how 1987 ended. 1988 was quickly approaching with something. I can't believe what I just saw.
High fly ball into right field. She is gone!
A lip-syncing scandal unfold and the exodus of the Great One. But that is for next year. We hope you find some patience while you wait.
I thought it was the door to love. It was the door to hell!
Coming soon, 1988.